So we are going to have fun tonight. We have got the amazing Jean-Claude from Beyond Mystic and my dear friend Rachel. So welcome, Jean-Claude, to our show. How are you today?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing well, thank you.
Oh, fantastic. So today we would like to get a bit up close and personal because your show is one of the most fascinating for me because you have such a diverse range of skills and knowledge and background experience and everything. I mean, you know, you've got politics, you've got your travel, your treasure hunting, your healing and energy work, your psychic abilities, your love of nature and the outdoors. So we're going to have so much to chat about today. It's almost, where do you start with something like you? But to start us off on the trail, how did you get into talking about all the stuff you're talking about now, about what's been happening over the last year? What really fired that up for you?
Without getting into some of the code words that might get us and get you in trouble here on YouTube, it all started because of the health situation around the world. I just felt at that time compelled. I had been thinking about creating a YouTube channel maybe 6 months prior to that, but I was always hesitant. I'm like, I'm busy. I have all this travel stuff. Can I really handle, having a community online and all that? So I was struggling with the idea of starting the channel. But when all of this started, I'm like, oh no, I have to save my peace. I have to express what I'm thinking. I have to get out there and talk to the community. And that's what started. My first video was about this very topic. And of course, that's what eventually got me into trouble and eventually got my channel deleted. So, it's been a crazy ride. And since then, I've rebuilt the community and it's stronger than ever. So I'm absolutely very grateful for everyone who watches the show. But yeah, that's how it started, oddly enough. It was the kick in the butt that maybe we all needed to get started on our life mission.
Yeah, and you're very good at interviewing people. That you have this knack of bringing all sorts of things out from people that you'd never know before. So yeah, no, you've got a fabulous talent there, definitely.
Well, thank you, Rachel. I appreciate that. And, that's what makes it so difficult for me to be on the receiving end of interviews. Yeah. I don't like speaking about myself. I like learning from everybody else. And I said yes to this interview because I've seen some of your interviews on YouTube and I thought, oh, these guys are great. I can have a great conversation with them. And I also had this interview with Anya Kay, who absolutely did a fabulous job making me feel comfortable and, sharing more of my personal story. So I'm happy to be on the show. You guys are amazing.
Yeah, you can ask us questions as well if you like, and we can do a two-way thing if you really wanted to. So,
no, we'll do the way you guys wanted to do it for today. But what I'll do though, I'll take you up on that. I'll invite you on my show, and then we'll flip the tables on you.
Okay. We'll be gentle with you. But honestly, it is quite amazing. So what I'd like to start with, you've had quite a varied career in the past, haven't you? You've been involved in politics, IT. Can you just talk us through what you've done in those sort of roles and how that's relevant? Because you've got some really relevant background experience to give you a very good insight to what's been happening over the last year.
Okay. I actually started with the idea of going to a career in the military. So as a kid, I went into the Royal Canadian Army Cadets, the militia, and I wanted to go to a military college to become an Air Force pilot. That was my dream. And as I was coming out of high school, the Canadian government was starting to shut down military bases across Canada. It was a budget thing. And so I was looking at that, I'm like, oh, probably not a good career choice if the options are going to be limited for me. So I went to my backup plan, which at the time I love economics. I was very good at that in high school. And so I decided to go into economics, politics, and law. That was my field of study in university. And oddly enough, as I was going through university, I was working as a bartender and a waiter in restaurants, like most people to pay for university. And I met this gentleman who was like, Jean-Claude, you seem too smart to be a waiter. What's going on? I'm like, well, I'm paying for school. I'm just doing a job to pay for school. He says, well, I have a job for you. I'm like, what is it? He says, well, it's in IT. We're this division of Canada Post, and we just outsourced their mainframe at the time, and they were transferring all of that into the networking side of Windows NT. So I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. So I started working in IT and eventually got into doing database management. The province where I live had bought this voter ID tracking software. We could talk about the elections for this year, but that's another subject. But anyways, when they bought this software, they needed people to teach the electoral districts how to use it and how to enter and manage those databases. So I started getting involved in politics that way. And eventually I was brought in to become a campaign manager. And then eventually I made my way up to the position of chief of staff to a very prominent minister here in Canada. So it was a wild ride. I went from, wanting to go into military, then into IT, and then into this political worlds. I don't know where you want to go from there. I'm happy to answer questions, but there's a large swath there of years in my career.
Yeah, you did a lot of traveling in that job, haven't you? So you've done a lot of traveling with lots of your roles, haven't you? Because we'll get onto the treasure hunting in a minute. But, was that as something that was a big part of your life back in the past in terms of visiting? Is that a passion of yours, travel?
Right. Well, politics also brought me there because at some point in the late 90s, Canada was revamping all of their immigration law. And I was a constitutional law, I don't want to say expert, I don't want to call myself expert, but that was my field of study. And of course, I was looking at the French Language Services Act and also the Official Languages Act being French here in Canada. So I knew the Constitution as it pertains to our language policy. And at that time, Canada was struggling to recruit highly trained international workers to come into Canada to fill some of those labor shortages gaps. So I was part and parcel working with the provinces to rewrite those immigration policies. And eventually what happened was Canada decided to go on the offensive and really go out in the world to recruit these people. So I was chosen to be one of those ambassadors, if you wish, to go across the world and recruit people. And so that was a fascinating 2-3 years of my life, just going through the understanding and the different culture shocks everywhere around the planet and dealing with accreditation, which was the biggest problem at the time. People who have, for example, a doctorate degree in North Africa doesn't necessarily meet the requirements to be a doctor here in Canada. So we had to go through all of those things for a number of years, but it did bring me to travel. And that was a big eye opener for me. I was a young lad, and it made me the person I am today with this global view of the population and of the issues. Whereas before that, I had a very, geocentric view of my world. So that really opened me up.
Yeah. You've had an amazing, even just a little bit you've told us so far, it seems that all these opportunities have really opened up for you at just the right time. Not, it doesn't sound like you came out of uni sort of planning that route, and now look at all these amazing things you've done very early on in your career.
Right, absolutely. Well, by the age of 30, I had left politics and I was recruited to be the CEO of Economic Development Association. And so that brought me into tourism, industry. And so again, we brought in the immigration part of that too, because we were recruiting international firms to come and invest here in the province where I live. So that was also, again, the economy part of that came into play too. So I understood how different policies from different countries really work together, and how, again, we weren't living in this small bubble. So it really, at every step of the way, my mind was growing and growing to have this bigger and bigger world view of my life. So it's been quite a fascinating show, but at the same time, a big struggle, because at every step you're challenged. And it wasn't a challenge, but it was a challenge. At every step, I had to learn that I didn't know a lot of things, right? Because as you go and you're like, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I didn't know that. And, you're just forced to learn all of these things. I mean, because I was doing the Official Languages Act part, where other people in politics were very segregated. And the way that politics works, you have different ministries, as you know. People will do healthcare, education, development in mines, electricity or energy. I had to look at all of that. And so this ties into what I'm doing today. I had to understand everybody's policy framework as it pertained to the Constitution. So I was always changing from one ministry to the other to provide advice to the government. So again, here, what I do on my show, I look at every aspect of life and how that combines into making better humans and closer, I guess, to self-mastery.
It's quite a mix of kind of the left brain side of things, I suppose the analytical side, but then there's the right brain side, in which I think you were obviously developing as well. And do you think that helped you kind of start learning and trusting I suppose, your instincts and, you know, how to let, I suppose, the universe guide you in certain ways.
Well, yes, and I actually started with that side of the brain when I was a kid. In kindergarten, I would read palms, and I was already quite weird at the time, or different, and I thought by expressing some of these abilities I would make friends, but it actually turned out to be the contrary. You know, kids would laugh at you, or you know, they would call me, "Oh, Jean-Claude, read my palms," and it was more of a parlor trick than anything else. But I didn't know what the lines meant. I would just concentrate, look at person's hand, and basically listen to the voices. Okay, so this started at a very young age, but it turned to inevitably, it brought me into problems because I didn't have a filter. I was 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, you know, and I would just say things as I was hearing them, and sometimes um, things that would be embarrassing for the person hearing them, including one where I said the word incest. And at that time, I didn't even know what that meant. I was just a kid. And so that person, you know, in front of everybody else in the schoolyard said, no, you're lying, you're crazy. And so I kind of put that away, right? Because I'm like, oh, this doesn't work. You can't make friends with this. And of course, throughout my life, I always had that ability, but I used it and I never really told anybody about it. So it very much, yes, to answer your question, it helped me quite a bit in politics, understanding who was thinking what around the conference table, and then of course into the economy as well. But it all started in shifting back in about 2008 when I retired from all of that. Then everything started coming back. The voices, the visual cues, like I call them trailers. Like I look at people and I see a little movie script go by, so I'll see the story of their life, or I get that, you know, that drop, that inner knowing. So I started going, I want to say a little bit crazy in 2008 and 9, because the voices were very strong at that point. And so I started taking Reiki courses, because at that point I just wanted to heal myself. I wanted to understand what was going on. I wanted to be able to maybe bring the volume down and have a little bit more control over all of these screaming voices, if you want to call it that way. So that was a big shift in my life. So that happened in 2008, 2009, and I've been on that track ever since. And it's been quite a ride also. So I don't know how much you want to get into that, the energy healing, but
big time, please, because I think that's just a fascinating part of it. So please do. Yeah.
Okay, so I eventually got my Reiki Master certification, and the whole process from beginning to end, I was realizing that, wait a second, this is what I'm supposed to be doing at every step. I thought originally, oh, I'm going to use this for me. I'm not crazy. I can live with these voices. And when I say voices, I just want to, it's my voice most of the time. It's my voice. It's not, although sometimes it's somebody else's voices, and we can get into that. But for me, it was like these big cues. I was hearing my voice for other people. So I understood it after that it was their higher self talking to my higher self. And then I was getting that download so that I can transmit that to that person. And so that was a big changing point in my life. And I told the story before, I think with Anya, but it started originally with, I had this company where I was doing audiovisual rentals for events. So I did events, structural lighting, structural sound stuff. And we had this contract for a wedding. And the whole week prior to the wedding, I kept having a voice in my head saying, you have to record this wedding. You have to go film, like a video film this wedding. And I was arguing with the voice the whole week. I'm like, no, I'm not going to go film this wedding. We're not contracted to do that. They'll think I'm crazy. Why am I there? I don't even know the bride. This was all organized through wedding planner and such. And so eventually by the end of the week, the voices were so loud. And I'm like, okay, I'll go film this wedding. And so eventually I did film the wedding. I went there that day. I had a sense of urgency. I had to film everything. And by the end of the day, nothing had happened. And so at that point, I told Sarah, like, I'm going crazy. I'm hearing voices. I thought for sure something was going to happen at this wedding. This is why I was being compelled to go film it. And nothing happened. And Sarah's like, don't be too hard on yourself. Maybe you'll find out later what it was all about. And I said, okay. So I put all the footage away. And about a month later, the bride calls me up and she says, oh, Jean-Claude, you remember me? My name's Emily. I'm like, yeah. And I started to sweat. I'm like, oh no, she's going to ask me why I filmed her wedding. And I'm going to have to tell her because, I was hearing voices. I was embarrassed still at that time. This was early on in all of this trajectory. Yeah. So anyway, she tells me, well, went on my honeymoon. My husband ate something that was poisonous to him and he died right there on the spot. And your footage is the only footage available that I have of my husband. Can I have it? So I'm like, oh, yes, of course you can have it. So that's why I was hearing those voices to film that wedding. And so as I went through all of this footage, I'm getting the goosebumps again just talking
Yeah,
about
I've
it.
just got them.
Right. As I was looking at the footage, I realized, oh my God, I had hours of footage of the husband. And typically, when you film a wedding, there's a term called chasing the bride. It's the dress, the first kiss, the cake cutting, the ring, and all that. So I had all of that, but I had all of the interactions of the groom with his kids, with his mom, like all those tender moments that she would need later on to kind of go through the grieving process, right?
Yeah.
And so that's when I learned, oh, when I get these voices, there's a reason and there's a responsibility attached for that to that. So I mean, we could do a whole show just on that. There's more stories like that, but eventually I got to learn how to deal with those voices and to understand what the role was and to kind of let myself be guided by that higher voice of myself. So
Wow.
That's incredible. It's just
yeah.
incredible. And no wonder you're doing the work you're doing now, because so many of us, you know, we've got this innate ability. I think all children have got this innate ability, and it's sort of, we often lose it or suppress it as we grow up, don't we? And as you say, you get ridicule for certain things, and you know, of course you can't talk to animals, of course you can't talk to trees, of course you're not saying that.
Right.
But now, never has it become more relevant than it is now, in terms of really tuning into that, because everything around us is so confused and muggled and tipsy-turvy and can't be believed. That's all we've really got, isn't it? Is listening to those inner, whether it's voices, whether it's feels, whether it's intuition.
Not only that, the gratification that comes through helping another person, that to me was so profound. Like for the story of Amelie now, and oh wow, like, you know, thank yous are not enough to express how I felt. Like she said thank you many times, but I felt so honored to have been part of that process. And what was funny is I went to see a medium at the time, and I was trying to make sense of all of this, like who was talking to me, what was going on. Again, this was very early on, it's about 10 years ago. And she says, oh, the voice in your head in this particular time, yes, you heard your voice, but it wasn't you talking to you, it was the husband. And she says, think about it this way, the husband's over here in time. No, wait, he's dead, he's over here. He came back over here to tell you to film over here so that she could grieve over there, right? Because when you're dead, there's no time. So I was like, what? I was like, wait. I said, that freaks me out. I don't want to talk to dead people. That says, well, you're connected, whether you want to or not. You have this huge rack of antenna. That's how she called it. Her name was Madame B, a French lady from Montreal.
We're losing Jean-Claude.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you know, what you said too about the why it's so important. Remember that girl who I had said incest to in the schoolyard? Yeah. She came back to me like maybe 20 or 30 years later in this whole cycle of time. So there's a big arc there, and it was at a high school reunion. And she bolted towards me during the high school reunion, and I saw her coming. I'm like, oh no, she's still angry at that, you know. And she says, you know, Jean-Claude, that thing you told me in high school. And I'm like, yeah. She says, well, you were right. You told me that in front of everybody else at school. But at any rate, it propelled me into dealing with it, telling my mom, and blah, 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 blah. So thank you so much, right? But at that time, I couldn't deal with it. And of course, you told me that in front of everybody at school. I'm like, oh, I don't know. I was a kid. You know? So again, I just realized that sometimes these arcs are so long, and that's where I struggle. And I have to admit, this is where I struggle, is when I do something because of a voice or a video or inner knowing, and I don't get the answer right away. That keeps me in limbo. Was I right? Did I do that okay? Like, it's still a struggle today, I have to admit. But again, when you get that gratification at the end, that person who values so much what happened and why and how you help them, it kind of makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's also trusting yourself, isn't it? Because everything in this world where we are now is deemed really to tell us not to follow those, you know. I think it's odd to a certain extent that you call it woo-woo, because I think it's incredible rather than woo-woo. And it's that, yeah.
You're absolutely right. And I called it woo-woo just to kind of déamortir in French, to disarm people. Like, I'm like, I'm
Yeah.
not taking myself too seriously. It is a serious matter, as you say, but I don't want to put out myself to, well, I'm serious and this is how it is. I try to make light of it, but you're absolutely right. We live in woo-woo, and people think we don't have woo-woo, and we live in the structured box that the paradigm tells us we live in. But really, that's a small box within the rest of it, and the rest of it is woo-woo. Absolutely, I agree with
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because so many people are still stuck in that world where if you can't explain it clearly, scientifically, or logically, then they won't accept it will exist. And look at where that's got us. It's not served us too well, has it, so far as a species? And I just find it fascinating because you don't find that resistance to these sort of things in the animal kingdom. It's quite incredible. And even when you look at indigenous tribes and these, a lot of the things that we talk about as woo-woo, they've been such long-term established gifts that were very honored in a lot of tribes and traditions, and they've, since sort of the world of science has come in, they've been very much ostracized, haven't they?
Absolutely. And that was part of um, religion, and how they expanded through the planet, and they were really stamping out all of this woo woo, from the druids to, like you just said, the natives everywhere around the planet. And I actually seek that now. Like, when we're doing the treasure hunting stuff, we go meet the local tribes, and we want to hear the old stories, and we want to do the sun dances and the moon dances. And it's been quite a ride in the last couple of years too. I've been spending a lot of time in New Mexico, and that's they call it the land of enchantment. There is a reason for that. And I recommend, like, I do this with my kids, I bring them to the woo, right? Because I want to show them the different paradigm than what they're learning in school. And so my heart feels for them too, because I think a lot of parents are in that same way, especially those who are awake and open to all of these things. They're trying to figure out, well, how do I teach my children? If I tell them too much, then they don't fit in school, and then they're
Yeah.
going to be ostracized in school. Because I was ostracized as a kid in school too, because I didn't really fit the way my brain thought. And so I don't want my kids to live through that. But at the same time, I know all the beauty and the rewards that comes out from living in that woo, and living in harmony with your higher self, as opposed to the trajectory that the matrix wants to bring you in. So it's always a balance there with the kids. I'm not sure if you guys, Catherine, I know you have two kids. Like, how do you deal with that? Sorry, I'm asking you the question here. Going back to the interview skills.
It's a real fascinating one. And, mine are older, but obviously I've been through this over the host of years. And it's fascinating. It's when we're in our home environment, it's really, really easy. My husband and I have always talked to trees, we've always talked to animals, and they've grown up thinking that's completely normal. And in fact, my son, from a very early age, he would always wild forage from a toddler, and he'd know exactly what he could eat. I mean, I'm a herbalist and I loved it, but I hadn't taught him any of this. He just naturally had that ability to know exactly what he could eat and what he couldn't. It was incredible. But then as you go through school and your friends start taking the mickey out of them, it's really quite hard. And then I've seen that sort of get suppressed, but it's still there. It's still there. And I think, you can see it's still there, but I can also see the struggle of where you're trying to, sort of feel the courage. As I can remember what it was like to be a teenager. I can still remember. And it's a hard time, isn't it? When you're trying to find the confidence to really be yourself. And also explore all these other wonderful things that are available. I just think it's a work in progress. And my husband and I always joke that we should have put a big counselling fund together for all the mistakes you make as a parent, but you try your best and you live and learn. And this year has been particularly interesting because all my peer groups are completely on a different page to me. Absolutely. I'm a biologist, and, I'm at complete odds to all of them. And I think that's been, in some respects, quite hard, but in other respects, I'm getting advice from, my daughter saying, well, this is just fantastic, and this is the perfect time for you to learn not to care what other people think. And, I've heard you mention before, our children are just so wise. I think sometimes, they they're a lot better than we think we are. We, as a parent, you worry a lot about them, or I do anyway. My husband's so laid back, he's horizontal, but actually they're so well sorted and they've got so many skills that I never had at that age, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Rachel.
No, I was just going to say we're very good at almost complicating life too much, aren't we? And it's so nice to have that simplicity that children sometimes have. And I think they're even very funny in the way in which they present themselves, or a question sometimes, because their rationale is so completely different. And we've built up this kind of, brick wall almost as to what society and how we should act. So it's really nice and refreshing sometimes to hear it from children.
Absolutely. I just did this interview a couple of days ago with Sherry Divban, and she was talking about how the children that are coming in now too are much, much, much higher, coming from a much higher frequency. And so we're trying to attribute to them the education, the learning process that we went through, but really they're coming in from a much, much, much a different vantage point. So we have to let them kind of teach us how to be there for them as they grow. So it's a different mindset altogether.
Absolutely.
Oh, sorry, carry on, Rachel.
No, it reminded me of a TED talk years and years ago that I saw of a chap that took a group of children between 4 and 6 year olds and gave them the scenario of what was wrong with the world and said, sorry, this is yours now to fix, we want you to fix it, basically. And they had 3 days in order to sort out all these problems. And at the last minute, they all shared all the money, and they all, but it was interesting in which, who was going to lead each country and how they were going to manage it, the politics, the money, etc. But within 3 days, they figured out all the issues in the world. 4 to 6 year olds.
It's that simple. It's that simple. When you get out of the way, it is that simple. But we think it's all complicated, but it's really not. So we just got to remove that very, very small part of the population that's in the way. And again, maybe not get into that here and have trouble with this stuff.
Well, it's very true. But on that note, in terms, one of the things I want to hear from you, Jean-Claude, is with everything's going, so you have a tremendous amount of knowledge. You do much research on so many different areas, and obviously that's come from a lot of your background as well. So how do you balance the side of yourself where you're researching and keeping up to date with everything that's going on, with living in the moment and creating your new future?
I don't. I try. It's still a work in progress. I have to admit, starting in 2008 or 9, I got into this path of just being a sponge, learning everything I could about everything. I was just absolutely fascinated, and I had been fortunate enough in my life at that point to be able to spend a lot of time doing exactly that, just researching on a daily basis. And I got to the point where I felt, again, even more alienated than I was as a kid, because I had this worldview that very few people around me couldn't hold a conversation with me. So it was very difficult. And at a certain point, I started realizing I'm separating myself even more from my friends, my family, my colleagues, because again, I just don't think like them, and it's being more and more difficult. And at a certain point, I started asking myself, where's this all leading? Why am I so interested in this worldview and to go into that huge, immense detail in every aspect of life? I didn't have the answer, although I kept getting the feeling you're on the right track, just keep learning. We'll let you know, or words to that effect. So I kept getting that, just keep going. And so that happened up until, like I said, last year, when the whole situation happened. Then that voice switched into, now you're on deck. And I went, what do you mean I'm on deck? Like, it's go time. Oh, okay. So now I'm supposed to bring all of this together and then bring that conversation and raise that conversation level for everyone. So that's when I understood, oh, that's what that 10 years was all about. I had to bring it here. So now what you're asking me now, that's the hard part for me. I still feel very engaged and learning, but at the same time, I have to take the time to have these interviews, have these conversations, be in life and create and do my travel and all that. Now, one of the good things maybe that's helped me is that I can't travel. We're still on lockdown here. So that's not, for now, at least it's not in my way, because I'm a huge traveler. I love to travel. And so now, seeing as I'm stuck here, I'm like, well, okay, I'm traveling by doing these videos and communicating with people around the planet. But it's been a tough year, and it's still difficult, especially when the seasons change and I have a lot of work to do outside with the gardens, and so sometimes that overloads me, and I'm still doing sometimes 2-3 shows a day. It takes a lot, but at the same time I get so energized. Everyone's like, how do you do it? I'm like, I don't know. I get energy by doing the shows. I love doing the shows. I love talking to people, and I do all my shows live. And so that to me is so important, because it's like this interactive experiment. And I find that not only are people typing, I'm also receiving from the psychic world what they're also thinking. And it's so I'm engaged. When you guys always ask me or tell me, hey, JC asked the best questions, I'm like, I'm not asking them. Somebody's telling me to ask them, right? So it's the audience, it's my higher self, it's their higher self. So I'm getting this, it's a huge experiment. And I find it that way. And we can get more into that. I don't know where it's going. I just know that it's exactly what I'm supposed to do. So I'm working every day to try that balance. And again, just before you hear the show, I was working out. I was like, oh no, I got to put it in. Mind, body, and soul. You can't forgive one for the other. You really have to try to have that perfect triune. And so I work at it, but I'm by no means an expert at it. It's a work in progress. Sorry, that was a long answer, but it's a work in progress.
Things are normally a work in progress, but in terms of, I suppose, your abilities, and you know you're on the right path. And I think in terms of kind of where we're going in the future, and I don't know whether our DNA is going to be altered, and the gifts in which we have are going to be extended. And I think I think it's a magical world for you also, because do you think you will be able to help people with this intrinsic ability, say your psychic abilities? I think to a certain extent may help you teach others how to manage and cope with them as well.
Okay, so when I started the show, it's called Beyond Mystic, but the tagline was discover your spiritual superpower and develop self-mastery. I had no idea why that was my tagline, but I knew that had to be my tagline. Now I know. As I'm doing again these live shows, it's an experiment with the audience. And so the audience is leaking their psychic abilities into the show. My guests and myself are leaking our psychic abilities into the audience, and we're all growing faster because of it. That's what I see is happening. And I completely agree with you. Humanity, for some reason, is it the strange energies from space? Is it that galactic superwave that Dr. Paul Laviolette was talking about in 2011 coming towards us? Something is turning on the breakers in our breaker panel, right? So we're being reactivated. In my interview with Carrie Cassidy about her book, The Rebel Gene, we got into this, and the fact that we have this, we have many abilities that for some reason were turned off. So we could get into all of that. But I think some people are just realizing now that they can turn them on. And that was also my conversation with Jay Widener yesterday on the episode, or the day before, Beyond Disclosure. He talked about the fact that some humans are going way past the governor that was put in place in our psyche to make us good slaves, basically. And this is part and parcel why we're seeing all of things happening right now around the planet. They're trying to take control back of that, and there's too many people who are jumping the fence, so to speak. So we're not being good slaves here. We're being the rebels, or we're reactivating that rebel gene. And I find that just like when I'm doing interviews with Michael Jaco and Janine, Michael said this in our show twice. He said, JC, the way you're asking questions and having Janine there, you guys are triggering me to remember and to turn on more of those breaker switches. So I know this is what we're doing by having these conversations. We're triggering people, not necessarily teaching people, but helping them remember what they already know. That's, I think, is the big thing.
Interesting. Yeah, absolutely. It is that remembering side of things. And I think a lot of this is also shown to people within their dreams, because in our waking lives, we have so many barriers that we've built up. And I think it's quite magical what you're sharing in that way. I'm not asking a question here. I feel like you're
I
asking all
appreciate
the
that.
questions, Catherine. Sorry, I'm posing, opinions, I suppose, to a certain extent. But the dreams I've been having, and I think it's one of those amazing things. And intrinsically, we do so much better in a difficult situation because we find ways in which, to make something work, or to get over something, or to, help other people in order to help ourselves as well. But it's a fascinating one because it's actually been a real gift, has this, this issue that we've had in the world, because it's brought so many aspects, even getting rid of friends to allow more friends to come into your life, the cleansing side of that, the fact that we're not traveling, so we're maintaining things around us maybe a bit more, and relationships are building, and people are talking to next door neighbors a bit more, and they are simple things, but they are intrinsic to humankind, and we're going back to those aspects. Do you think I suppose you love your traveling side of things, so when there are no borders in the world, do you think you'd be wanting to still do a lot of traveling, or would you like to have, kind of a huge community around you, and people travel to you?
Let me go first to what you were saying. Oh, well, I just lost the point. You were just saying something before the travel.
I was saying that it's the basic things that we've forgotten about, and it's the difficulties in which have led us here.
No, you were saying something about dreams.
About dreams, and about how sometimes the barriers are down in the dreams, and so sort of a lot of the restrictions aren't there that people might put up in their day-to-day life.
Oh, I got it. You just said something about the situation around the planet, and I wanted just to go back to that, because as horrible as it is, that's what it was. For some reason, maybe something was blocking me from saying that, but as horrible as it is, it was also a catalyst for a lot of people, a very, very powerful and positive catalyst. And I think that those people who resonated to that call to action are the ones now making all the changes. And so I want to just take this opportunity to thank everybody who took that call, and who really activated, and who are doing whatever it is, the YouTube channel, speaking in the community, whatever it is, to get on that timeline that we want to create for ourselves. I think that's absolutely paramount. Now, going back to the travel, I see eventually my show is going to change. So for now, I'm in this process with the planet and with the audience, and we're living through a huge change. And I think that the show is helping people. I hope the show is helping people adjust to that change.
It is.
And to be ready for the change too, and to kind of like remove the fear. I say this a lot in the show, like knowledge is power. And with that power, you're making decisions out, not from a fear standpoint, because when you make those decisions from a fear standpoint, you're not making the right decisions for yourself. You're reacting, as opposed to making the proper decisions for your family and for your life. So I think the show is going to change eventually. When the travel opens up again, I'm probably going to mix the show into the travel. And so bring you along with some of the things that I've been doing in New Mexico, other vortex sites around the world. And maybe we'll start recreating at that point once we're ready. But we have a little hump to go through still, and it's right in front of us now. If you've watched the last couple of shows here with myself and Janine, I know she was on your show as well, there's a big tower card moment here just in front of us. So we still have a little bit of a ways to go, but that doesn't mean we have to forsake our ideas or our dreams of what the reality we want to create. We still have to strive for that every day. And I keep saying to everyone, whatever you do in your mindset in the day, at the end of the day, make sure that you move that needle at least 1 degree to the positive side, where you're creating the life you want to create. Because otherwise, the matrix is designed to push the needle the other way, to continue that slavery and have control over you. So some people are, all the way at 110% pushing that needle every day. But for humanity, I said at least 1%, like just that 1 degree to the positive side. I think if we all did that, oh my God, things would change so fast. And that hump that's in front of us would probably be easier than maybe it will be, because there's still people who are resisting. And I think that's the big thing and a big focus of the show, by bringing maybe we could talk about that. I bring people on the show who have very, very juxtaposed points of views, and I get a lot of shit for that. Pardon my French. Some people say, well, you shouldn't bring that person there. They don't agree with that person. I'm like, no, that's the exact reason why we should bring them. We're adults. We should be able to listen to everybody's point of view. Yeah. And maybe perhaps if we do that, we can put more pieces of the puzzle together. If we go into this limited hangout, we're all repeating the same thing. We're not really learning anything, and we're not challenging ourselves to rethink what we think we know. So a big part of my show is that also.
I think that's so important, Jean-Claude, and I've had stick for that as well. But I think it is so important because keeping that questioning mind, again, the children have the naturally questioning minds. And go back to what you said about just moving that dial a little bit forward each day. My daughter said that exact same thing to me this morning, completely unprovoked. She's very into her sport. She's amazing at sport. And she's like, every day you're just moving a little bit further towards your goal, a little bit further. And if you just keep that focus, and it's just realizing that we are responsible for creating our sort of reality, but also it's so important we keep that open questioning mind and have those adult conversations and listen to those other people's point of view, isn't it?
Absolutely. And again, because I was trained to do that in my previous work, I have the ability I was a mediator too. It's another part of the job, but really to bring people who had very different points of views together and to make deals or arrangements. In politics, that's it's an everyday task. You're dealing with very different points of views. And so I've brought that skill to the show too. And again, I've had trouble with that. A lot of people had trouble with that. And I find that I'm being compassionate with those people too. And I try not to react when I see those comments, because perhaps they're just coming off of CNN. They've just realized, CNN, whatever, they're lying to them. The mainstream media is lying to them. They just realized that. So now they're looking for, wait a second, I need more alternative views. So they come to my show, but they're not used to having people have disagreements on a show. On CNN, everybody tells you the same thing. You change the channel, they tell you the exact same thing. So it's like, okay, it's that cookie cutter approach. Here's the news, and this is what you're supposed to think. Whereas on my show, I'm like, that's not what we do. We bring different points of views, and then you have to decide what feels right to you, right? You have to take the good parts from everyone. And so at first, some people have trouble with that, but eventually if they stick with it, they're like, oh, I learned something. Oh, okay, that's okay. Oh, wait, they're not fighting. They're just having a passionate disagreement. That's okay too. So I've enjoyed that process quite a bit. And I find it's unfortunate. I've lost a few people along the way who, for some reason, didn't want to come back to the show because somebody else came to the show and said something that, maybe didn't go in line with what they thought. I'm like, well, isn't that what we're supposed to be all doing? If we're all this love and light and we want to help humanity, if somebody has the wrong opinion, don't you want your opinion to be heard? Like, shouldn't you come back to the show and have that conversation in a responsible way? Because I don't do aha, got you moment. I'm not a Jerry Springer show. Like everybody has the time and the respect they deserve to share their opinions on the show. And I really want to foster that. So I hope moving forward, some of those guests too might come back, but at the same time, everybody has their path and they have to choose what's best for them. And that's okay too. I have to do what I think is best for the channel and for the audience. And I struggle with that sometimes because it's not always easy to figure that out. Sometimes there's challenges there. And I know you guys know you have your own YouTube channels, and sometimes there's issues that arise. There's always drama in this community. And I find that, especially now, and Janine and I were talking about this off air the other day too. Like, there's a lot of division in this community, and we're trying to bring people together. And I feel this energy, call it the extraction matrix or whatever it is, it wants to divide us, because the more we're bringing people together, the more it feels in danger. So it's putting out all of this divisive energy in the field, and we have to be cognizant of that, us who are YouTube creators, to be able to say, oh, okay, let's maybe step above that, relax a little bit here. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I think there's been a lot of shifting of energies and a lot of divisions. And I think a lot of people who started out stepping into this world and starting their own channels, for example, a lot of people, it wasn't intentional. It wasn't sort of like a plan. So like you've explained with your journey, like, now's the time, right, get on and do it. Certainly for myself, it wasn't even on my horizon. But that's the story of my career, really. I sort of have had so many different careers and just gone with what feels right at the time, and then worked it out as I've gone along. But I think a lot of people are finding their place, are finding the confidence and their authenticity and how to put that across, because, you know, people, we're not actors, we're not actresses, we're sort of putting ourselves out there, and that's very different, isn't it? Because a lot of people, you're learning skills about how not to take things personally, about how to deal with different personalities, I deal with different stories, and there's so much division in terms of what's true, what's not, because the whole world's been a lie up until now. So it's almost like watching a bit of a reality TV show, I think, on screen, as everyone's going through their own personal evolutions.
Right.
Mm.
Yeah, I totally agree. And go ahead, Rachel. I don't want to interrupt you.
No, it was just, you know, it's understanding cultures as well, isn't it? And the more you travel, the more I think open you are to, you know, all these different points of view. And some people haven't, you know, ventured out really, so they haven't necessarily understood all these different ways of life. And, you know, I've been very fortunate to have lived in different countries, so it does open your eyes quite considerably, and also letting things go, you know, just sending love, thank you, goodbye. You know, my grandma was very good at saying goodbye.
Right. I try not to say goodbye to the audience. I want them to stick around. And you know what? One of the challenges I'm having now too, I'm a year and a half into it. Some people have been with me since day one. So they've moved that trajectory with me. But some people just got here a month ago, and they just got off the mainstream propaganda timeline. So I have to balance my shows for the new people and also be engaging enough for the people who've watched all of my shows for a year and who are like, okay, they're on that edge or at that tip of the spear and they want more of the up-to-date stuff. So I'm having trouble balancing that as well, as I look at the schedule and plan my weeks ahead of me. But another thing you just said, the authenticity, I think Catherine, you just said that. That's why I do all my shows live too. Like, I'm not editing anything. I'm making mistakes. I'm live. It's just me. There's no makeup crew. There's no lighting crew. No, it's just me. It's me and my guests. Like, here it is. We're live. We're raw. These are our actual thoughts or emotions as we're here on the show. And hopefully the people can see that. And again, that was a big part for me when I figured out that I could do these lives and how powerful they actually were, not just on the psychic experiment, but also on the authenticity level. I mean, that's where you really see the people for who they really are. And again, it's been a hell of a ride this whole year, being able to do that. And I've been so honored with all of the people who have come on the show and shared that experience with me. It's been absolutely fascinating.
It's a lovely word, is raw, isn't it? In so many different facets, you know, for food, for authenticity, for vulnerability. You know, rawness is where we can all connect in that way. But in terms of so you are we allowed to say the word aliens?
Yes.
Okay.
What's that? You broke up. I didn't hear the last part.
So I said it quietly because I wasn't quite sure whether we were allowed to say the word aliens. So I'm moving on. I hope that's all right. But
sure.
It would be fascinating to find out more about your treasure hunting and you know, these fabulous things that you found along your way, because that's another, you know, it's another, I don't know, realm, I guess, that you're embarking upon.
Sure. What would you like to know specifically?
So how did all that start? How did because obviously the treasure hunting is a passion of yours, and the traveling has enabled you to obviously get to many different places, and it would just be fascinating to know, did you just fall into it? You know, I mean, nothing happens by accident. We all know that, you know, and there is a path, there is a journey, but right. I'm quite excited to find out, you know, how did it all start?
Well, as a kid, I always looked up at the stars and I wanted to travel the stars. So you can go back to the ET part in a moment. But it happened also as a kid. I always watched TV shows and was fascinated by, I think it was Robert Stack, Believe It or Not, those kinds of shows that would just like bring you to these other worlds, these other places. And I'm like, I want to go there. I want to go visit that. And so that was always in my field of view. And then with some of my jobs, I was able to travel, basically being paid to do my work, but then take a few days off to visit the area I was traveling in. And so that got me engage in traveling the world and being a human of the planet, so to speak, as opposed to, you know, just a local area where I live in. And I found that I quickly realized that as I was traveling to these locales, I was being brought there for a reason. So on the surface level, you would think, oh, I have a job, I have to go to this conference and this country and whatever. But then as I was there, I realized that I was supposed to be there to meet this person. And when I say that person's like, oh, that person gave me keys. And I say energetic keys. They taught me something. They made me remember something about my DNA or whatever it was. And so there were the people I met and also the places themselves, the structures, the streets, the buildings, the monuments. They also hold all of these energetic keys for you. So when you go there, they also give you back these keys. And so you remember even more how you're connected to the planet. We're all one. And so that's been a big theme in the last number of years, is realizing that and taking the time to really exchange that energy, that knowledge, whatever you want to call it, when I travel. So maybe we can recommend to the audience that when we're allowed again to travel, to think about it that way. It's not just about the food and, you know, relaxing on the beach or whatever it is. It's also about the people, the energy, the place itself, and take time to just breathe and listen to what's being transmitted to you. And so I've been doing a lot of that just before COVID, and more, and realizing that, oh my God, I might have missed a few things while I was traveling 20 years ago. And now I'm revisiting these sites and I'm seeing it from a completely different aspect. One example of that was maybe Sedona. When I worked in a couple of years ago, and I think it was 2001 or two, I had worked on a contract maybe 3 or 4 months. And I was looking at, you know, the sign vortices and the tours and shamanic tours, and I was looking at all those signs like, those people are crazy. You know, I was still I was working 80 hours a day in that time in politics, and so I was like, those people are crazy. And so I missed a lot of that energy stuff, even though it did get to me, but it was planting seeds for my return. And so when I went back in I think 2016 or 17, suddenly it got to me. I got it. Oh, wow. Okay. Oh, yeah, there's absolutely something here. Right. So I want to encourage the audience to maybe when they go and travel, really think about what the place is telling you and what it's transmitting to you and what you can transmit to it. Because again, it's all this big exchange of energy. That's what it's all about.
It's just amazing. I mean, the amount of places I've been around the world where just the most bizarre experiences have happened. You've bumped into someone in the middle of a jungle somewhere, you know, that you knew when you were 5, or it's these energetic imprints, as you say, that everyone and everything is leaving everywhere you go. It's just absolutely fascinating. I absolutely love traveling. I've done loads and loads of traveling, and am I looking forward to doing more? I am. But I think in a different way to what I've done before, you know. So yeah, it's wonderful, and sometimes you need that break from things, don't you, to make you really appreciate and reevaluate how you want to do it differently when you start back up again.
Right. The other thing about the sites too, as you are walking in your authentic self and you're listening to where you are, it also wants to speak more to you. It being the environment, the elementals maybe living in that environment just off of frequency that we can't see. One example of that was in New Mexico a couple of years ago. We were doing this healing ceremony on the mountain, and we're really honoring the massacred natives there. So there's a big story there, but at any rate, we're healing the wounded warrior. That's what the ceremony was all about. And as we were finishing this ceremony, this thing came to us, flew over us, kind of like hovered for a minute or for a few seconds, and then just flew off. And as we described that to the medicine woman, she looked at us and she's like, "You guys called in a sylph?" And so we're like, "What's a sylph?" And so it's kind of like a fairy, but it looks more metallic. So it's like maybe 1.5 feet long, female body with more than maybe 4 or 6 wings, and it feels like a chrome kind of shiny metallic thing. And so anyways, they know about these apparitions, they call them all the time when they do their moon dances and stuff. And so they were looking at us, but you guys are white. I just didn't mean that in a derogatory way, but it's like, well, you're not initiated. How did you guys bring that up? I'm like, well, here's the energy work we're doing. We're just paying homage to, you know. Oh, wow. Okay. And that's when we got invited to more of these ceremonies, and they really brought us in. And a lot of the elders at the time were like, the male elders from these tribes were like, why are we telling this sacred knowledge stuff to these foreigners? You know, this is supposed to be like tribal, you know, hereditary, passed down from generation. And it was the women in the tribe who are saying, well, listen, this is the time. This is go time. The planet is waking up. We have to share these knowledges. And what's happening is that the youth in a lot of those tribes are not interested in this. They're playing with their iPads, their iPod, you know what I mean? Or they're going off to university. They're not doing the ceremonies anymore and paying homage to that. And so like, we have to work with the people who want to do the work. And so that's how we got involved, I guess, even more with some of these beautiful ceremonies. And that's just one example of the apparitions there. But I mean, you want to talk about woo, a lot of crazy things come up when you're using this type of energy and with focused intent. And when you've traveled, again, here's the thing, it's like a video game, like Mario. I don't play video games, but you know what I mean. You have to capture all these little things as you go, and then as you capture all these items, then you eventually go through that door at the end. Well, it's the same thing for us humans. As we travel around the planet, we're getting these keys from all of these energetic sites, and it makes us brighter or more susceptible to being able to pierce through some of those veils when we go to different sites after that, because we have enough keys to go through frequency wise the transmission at that particular locale. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm translating as I'm going here, but it's fascinating stuff. And I think this is what I'd love to eventually bring the channel to as well. So depending how I guess the next couple of months go, we'll see, but I'd love to do the travel show with the audience. That's eventually where it's going.
You say, sorry, I was just going to ask a bit more about keys. You say keys, and I'm trying to visualize and understand. So you mean unlocking the potential, unlocking the energy and being part of it, instead of just vaguely being on your iPad and walking along a street and not really taking any notice and understanding.
Right. Everywhere you go, people have keys for you and places have keys for you, and they're willing to give it to you. That's why they're there. If only you would recognize it, right? And so often you're walking in the path. Master told me this in Reiki. You're walking on the path, and what you see is a rock. But if you're not at the right frequency, you see a rock. But if your frequency is higher, then suddenly you see, oh no, that's not a rock. That's an elemental. It's a this or that or whatever it is. And now suddenly you can engage with it. But if you're not at that frequency, you're walking right past what you think is a rock, and you've completely missed the point of walking that path. And so again, the whole question is to slow down and to really expand your consciousness and your awareness when you're at these energetic sites, or also when you're with people, to understand who is there for what reason. And so I always ask this too, when I do interviews with people, I say, who are you to me? And a lot of people are like, what do you mean? Well, think about that. So who are you, Catherine, to me? Who are you, Rachel, to me? And who am I to you, right? In the show with Janine's birthday, I asked the question, are we all connected? Did we make a soul contract to do the work that we're doing? Yes. And, you know, Janine pulls the cards. Oh, yeah, absolutely, yes. Right. So that's who we are to each other. And I encourage the people who are watching the show to think that way when they're meeting somebody new along that path. Think, who are you to me? And that opens you up to, what can I give you then in that contract? Or what can you give me in that contract? How can we have that exchange? But if you don't go in the route of trying to figure that out, you kind of miss that conversation. And the more you have these conversations, the more you expand, the more you have those keys. And those keys enable you to open frequencies. Basically is what it is. It's like one step after another, and it brings you to utter knowledge. And this is what I told you earlier. Every day I go and I realize how much I don't know. I still need all of these keys. Even though I've picked up a lot of keys along the way, I realize I still need to pick up a lot of keys. And I wish I would have paid attention sooner in my life to all of these keys. I'd be further ahead. But then again, the universe has you exactly where you're supposed to be. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
The more you learn, the more you don't know.
Absolutely.
What fun the journey is. I mean, that's the whole beauty of it, isn't it? Is like, we don't want to get to the end. The journey is such a joy, and all these things we are learning. And each day, you know, I get to the end of the day and I sort of sit there and the cat jumps on my lap and I'm just like, wow, this is what I've learned today. This is what's changed for me. You know, I must say, over the last year, I don't think there's a day that's gone by where I haven't felt like a different person at the end of the day to how I woke up in the morning. And that's been really lovely.
Just to give you an example, and perhaps here, if you want, you can share some of the scuba diving pictures. But as an example to the Keys,
Yeah.
a lot of scuba divers, you go into these resorts and they're diving, and the dive master says, okay, today, here's the path we're going to do, and blah, blah, blah. And these people are rushing to do the path. I'm like, wait a second, you just missed the whole thing. It's right here in a 2-foot square area. That's where all the magic happened. And so when I started scuba diving, I bought myself an underwater camera with a macro lens, and I was fascinated by small things where everybody was trying to, oh, we'll see the shark over there and they're swimming, you know, and you're like taking up all the oxygen in their tank, very excited. I was just like, no, breathe, hold on, just look around you. And then suddenly you'll see all the life will come to you as opposed to you having to run to it. So if you want to show a few pictures there, you can see how much is really incredible in that moment of time if you just stop and pay attention. That's really the magic is. And so I do that in my scuba diving experience, but I do that in life too, whether that's a meal, having this conversation with a person, or just sitting on a rock. It's always the same thing.
You've got those ones, Rachel, the scuba diving ones.
Do you know, I haven't, so I've had to allow my preferences. I've got a Mac, so I've had to change my preferences, but I have to shut down the program in order to.
Okay, let me see if I can.
I'm so sorry. So it won't allow me unless I leave the meeting. And
I've got the travel ones, so I haven't got the other ones open. But let's just talk us through a couple of these whilst we're.
This is Elephant Butte. This is in New Mexico. And what's fascinating about this site too, apparently a lot of the psychics who go there understand that there is a cave maybe 300 or 400 feet down from this particular spot where there is a lake. And at that lake, in the middle of the lake, there's this huge green crystal, perhaps emerald, we're not sure what it is. And on the walls there is etched a bunch of Egyptian symbols, including the Ankh for eternal life. And so this is a very, very magic site. Just being around there, there's immense energies. And so a lot of the shamans there do astral travel or astral projection to get into that specific cave to meditate with those waters. A lot of places in New Mexico are like that. They're connected underground through the waters and through all the crystal formations. I didn't send you the pictures of the crystal caves there, but they're absolutely fascinating.
Gosh.
wow. Did you scuba dive into them then?
No, not that one. A lot of these places, unfortunately, are closed off to the population, right? So the governments or the powers that be always have a reason. Oh, it's for your safety. This is closed off. This is closed off. So there's a couple of places. If you scroll back to that picture, I think I was looking at a rock there. These were petroglyphs. I forget what town that was in, but at any rate, we jumped the fence to get to them because, again, they were closed off to the population and we weren't allowed to get to them. And the real stuff that people really wanted to see were past the fence. And we had been told that by a few archaeologists. And so we needed to get there at a specific time of day to be able to get to those petroglyphs. But anyways, there's so much to discover. And I think if anything we can share with the audience is just, go out and look and explore and really pay attention and slow down. It's too bad we can't bring the scuba diving pictures in there because just some of the imagery there, why I was so fascinated with that. And I think maybe this ties into the ET world. Underwater, it very much feels like you're in another alien environment. You're weightless, all your senses are different. And some of the beauty that comes underwater in a lot of these formations and the coastal reefs and all that, it's just absolutely fascinating. And again, it brings your mind to understand that there's way more than this meat sack that we think we're in. Life is everywhere around us if we just slow down and pay attention and listen to it.
Yeah, it's like angels being underwater, actually. I did a lot of scuba diving to get over my fear of deep water. And even though on the surface, you know, you can't see underneath, and it's the fear of the unknown. But as soon as I went back into the water, even with tears streaming down, you know, my face, as soon as I hit the water and you're in that environment, it is like angels are singing down there. It's the most divine environment. Oh,
Absolutely. The
heaven.
first time I was at a resort. This was back in the 90s. And for some reason, it was raining the whole week we were there. There's absolutely like torrential rain. Like it was the worst week of the year to go to this resort. And so every morning I was having breakfast and I was looking at this guy sitting next to the pool with a little scuba tank, free classes. And I'm like, well, might as well take a class. There's nothing else to do. So I took a scuba diving class that day. And so he teaches me the basics, blah, blah, blah. We go, you know, in the deep end of the pool. And then he comes back up. He says, come on, man, you're effing with me. I'm like, what do you mean? He says, you've done, you're a diver. What are you talking about? I'm like, no, dude, it's the first time I've done this. He says, well, your buoyancy, your breath control, all this. Like, come on, you're an expert diver. I'm like, no, it's a serious guy. This is the first time I do this. He's like, okay, okay, sure, whatever. You know, he didn't believe me, but I was such a natural. When I got underwater, I realized too, there was something about me and my makeup that made it so I was very different than other people underwater. And even today, like I'm 6'4", I'm a very tall guy, I have a lot of muscle mass, and I take in a lot of oxygen. And we could do an hour dive, and at the end of the dive, I still have air in my tank because I'm controlling and maximizing the way I'm breathing. And smaller guys, half my size, are out of air maybe half an hour earlier, and they have to jump up to the boat. So there was something natural about going underwater for me. And it's, again, it's a whole other world out there for sure.
I'm the opposite, I'm afraid. I'm sure I was drowned in Atlantis. So Coco's just come to join us. Say hello, Coco.
Hello.
But yeah, I still have to overcome that fear. Well, I'm quite conscious of time and how much you've given us. It's just fascinating. Honestly, I really could talk to you all day. But I did want to ask you, in terms of where we're at now, what is your hope for what we're about to see in moving forward? You know, what is it you're manifesting for yourself and the rest of the world to happen now?
I guess the best way to answer that is I wish both for myself and for humanity to do what is important to them, to fix them, and then to create the reality that they want. If we all just did that, never mind everything that's outside, everybody's always looking for outside confirmation and validation from the outside. None of that holds a candle to the validation and the self-love and confirmation you get when you get it from the inside, when you know that you're on your right path and you're doing the right thing for yourself. If everybody did that, the world would shift a lot faster. So I guess that's my biggest hope, is that everybody concentrates and works on themselves. I mean, they always say the same thing in the airplane, you know, when the mask comes down, put on your mask first, and then you can help other people. And I think we're always looking at helping everybody else, and that's a valiant trait in a lot of people. But at this time, we're also being called, we're moving into this age of Aquarius, and we're all being called to look at perhaps all of those karmic wounds and loops that are still in our program, and to see which one of those we need to cut. And we are able now to see them and make those conscious decisions to say, hey, do I want to live this karmic loop another 24,000 years in that cycle, or am I done? Because the universe doesn't care if it takes you 30 minutes, 3 minutes to understand a learning experience, or 4,000 years, right? It'll give you the experiences you need to learn. And so it's up to you, really. And so if you're manifesting and you're self-sabotaging, you have to slow down and realize universe is not doing that to you. It's doing that for you, because that's what you're manifesting. So again, people need to realize, I think that's the biggest thing, they need to realize that they're responsible for the thoughts that they hold, and how those thoughts impact the world. If we all just stopped and thought about the responsibility, the huge responsibility that comes from that psychic world and the thoughts that you hold, a lot can change really fast.
You agree, don't you? She always does this. It's really fascinating. She always comes in to join the chat. It's amazing. So that is amazing. And that is such good advice for people, because, you know, it's something everyone can be doing right now, costs nothing, and they'll transform their life, won't it?
There's a lot of gurus out there, and we're moving into an area of no gurus. We are our own gurus if we only just paid attention, right? And I'm not saying that some people don't need help. It's like when you break a leg, you might need a cane or a support for a while, but you can't hold that support. You have to make it your own. And so on the guru world, it's the same thing. And that's what I say on my show. Don't listen to me. Listen to everyone and follow no one. Follow you. That's what's really important. Once you connect with the you, your higher self, that's when all of the magic happens, really.
And that higher self can be accessed initially through, intrinsically we love something specifically, and we're all completely different in that way, and that's the magical element to it, isn't it? And if we really embellish what we love, everybody wants something at the end of the day. So if we do something that we love and we build on it, then intrinsically it does become something that is nothing else. And I suppose when you think about business and the way in which they conduct it, go and have a look at all your competition. But when you do that, you then, I suppose, impregnate the thoughts in which you should have your business and how it then fits into this kind of horrific world. So if you don't then do that and you I suppose utilize what you have inside and our own intrinsic abilities, that's the magical element. And I've always described it as different jigsaw pieces, making them as colorful. Every single person is a jigsaw piece, and making that really colorful. And then when you bring that picture together, wow, what a view.
Yeah. And to add to what you just said there too, it's all about the amount of energy you can bring to the task. And so if you understand, and again, I got in trouble for this, so I'll choose my words carefully, but we live in this energy extraction matrix, just to call it that for now. And people need to first realize that. And once they've realized that, the first step is, okay, how do I stop the bleeding? How do I disconnect from that, right? Because this energy is being sucked off from my field, used basically to enslave me. That's the reality we're living in. But we're changing that now. And that matrix is breaking down on one hand. And we might be getting some help also on that front. That's a whole other show. But at the same time, we as humans, again, we have the responsibility to make that choice to disconnect from that matrix. So once you stop the bleeding and nobody's extracting from you, you've gone through all of these deep core wounds, you're doing the cord cutting, all of these things, right? The conscious stuff. Then you have to realize, okay, I've stopped the bleeding. Now, how do I build my charge? Right? How do I go into that lower 10 Tien and expand that energy outwards? And again, I did a few shows on that last year. The series was called The K-Files, Kundalini Secrets Revealed. And we talked about how all of these ancient societies around the world absolutely understand that it's all about energy. And so if you're a master of picking up that chi, that prana, that vril, call it what you will, silently you have the energy to apply to everything you just said. But if you're still attached to that matrix, your ability to make those choices, to manifest, is severely diminished because you're working with a very poor charge in your battery. So again, this topic is one of the things also that is very, very, very censored here on YouTube, because once people realize that machine, we could call it a machine, it's probably closer to a machine than anything else, is in big trouble. Because when we manifest from the light perspective, we were tenfold, 100-fold, 1,000-fold more powerful than when these dark magicians are manifesting from the dark using our energy. Universe really favors our energy. If only we would step into it. That's what we're all called to do right now.
Yeah. Beautifully said.
Absolutely perfect.
Love it.
Thank you so much for your time tonight. Honestly, absolutely fascinating. I do feel I've got to know you a lot better tonight. So thank you for being so honest and open. And I really hope we can do a follow-up to this sometime.
Absolutely. I'd love that. I love the questions. Again, you guys are amazing. You made me feel comfortable. A little bit nervous as we started the show, and my muscles were still shaking from my workout just before we started here. So I was having trouble just calming down, but you guys did a great job. I absolutely love to come back, and I'll hold you to it also. I'll bring you on my channel. I'm going to ask you guys some probing questions as well.
Thank you so much, and have a fantastic time. And onwards and upwards, everyone. You have the power.
Oh,
Thank you.
what was that? You just broke up at the end. I didn't hear the last
Oh
one.
yes, the internet's not great, is it? We've got a really bad storm here. I was just saying to remind everyone that they have the power within them. Really important. We all have the power within us, and together we are stronger.
Absolutely.
Always. Yes.
Lots of love, both of you. Thank you.
Thank you
Merci
so much.
beaucoup. Merci.